Okay, so we're now going to talk about some exceptions to copyright. This doesn't mean copyright doesn't exist in a work, it just means you can use the work for certain purposes and it won't count as an infringement. Generally speaking, in the UK, this is what we call fair dealing, and that's not to be confused with fair use, which is an American concept and something that we will cover in another video. But what are the main fair dealing exceptions? Well, again, I've uncharacteristically made some notes, so let's go through them. We have criticism and review, quotation, reporting on current events, parody, caricature and pastiche, research and private study for non-commercial research, preservation or replacement copies, educational uses for instruction and examination, and text or data mining for non-commercial research. To go through those, criticism review, as it suggests, that's where you show somebody an artwork so you can comment on it. The artwork has to have been publicly available. It can't be that the first time you see it is in your video or your article. It has to have been on display somewhere. But once you do that, you can talk about it, you can refer to it, and as long as you're adding some value in terms of content, then you are allowed to use the work. Quotation, this is a relatively recent one, and it just allows you to quote selected parts from a work. For instance, you might want to quote something from a book on a poster or in another review, and that just clarifies that you are allowed to do that. Reporting of current events. Let's say, for instance, there's some controversial art in the news. You'd be able to show a picture of it. Generally speaking, whenever you do anything like this, you have to acknowledge the author. So you have to say who did the work. With broadcasting, or TV broadcasting, that's actually one exception. You don't have to do that. But generally speaking, you must identify the author of the work if you're going to be doing any of the sort of fair dealing provisions. To parody, caricature and pastiche, well, again, that's, joking about the art, commenting on it, making a spoof copy of something. Again, these are all very fact-specific as to what counts as parody or what counts as caricature, but generally speaking, there'd have to be some sort of exaggeration or some sort of comedic element added or some sort of satirical element. Research and private study for non-commercial research. If you're doing your PhD on an artist, you can actually make copies of their works just for your own personal use. However, if you were to publish your thesis, that wouldn't be covered. You'd need to get the artist's consent to be able to reproduce it, something like that. Preservation or replacement copies. One example, actually, Girl with a Pearl Earring, which of course is out of copyright. I'm pretty certain Vermeer died quite some time ago. But they made a very, very accurate facsimile of the painting while they were actually doing some research on it. That would have been covered even if the work was still in copyright. Museums can do this if they've got one of their paintings on loan or away for preservation or cleaning or something. They can put a facsimile up while they actually do that. Educational uses for instruction and examination. In an exam paper, you might be able to say something like, comment on this artist's work. What do you think about Banksy? Write your thoughts on this. That is allowed for very sort of limited purposes within an educational use. And text and data mining for non-commercial research. This is, for instance, if you're just compiling a catalogue or a database, or you're going online just to troll the internet, just to sort of see, what people are using, how many people are using JPEGs, how many people are using GIFs, something like that. That would be permitted. So that's the fair dealing exceptions. There are some other exceptions as well. Incidental inclusion. If you're out and about filming and you just get something in the background, then generally speaking, that won't count as an infringement. Although if that was, you were actually going out there to film the work, or to sort of comment on some sort of, posters or anything like that, that could actually be an infringement. Speaking of being in the public, certain works of art that are on public display, you can take pictures of those, but not photographs. But you can take a picture of a statue or a sculpture in a park, but it has to be something that's effectively permanently on display. If somebody's just put an art installation in your local park, somebody's doing, your sort of Henry Moore sort of, retrospective or something, that actually would be an infringement if you were to go and film that. Also, you could, if you're advertising the work, there's an implicit clause in any contract. For instance, if you put your work on consignment in the gallery can use your work to publicise the sale. But you've got to be very careful of that, because it has to be advertising the work in question. So say, for instance, you produced a catalogue and you put one work on the cover, you'd have to make it very clear that work was for sale. If you just put something on the cover without acknowledging that that's for sale, and you put the title and everything and all the other details, that might actually count as an infringement. And also you might be getting back into what we call the moral rights, where your use of the work on the cover of your catalogue might be infringing on the artist's moral rights. So that's the brief overview. Obviously, we'll look at this in more detail in future videos, but that's what we call the black letter law. And also in a future video, we'll cover what our friends across the Atlantic get up to with their fair use, which we see quoted a lot on the internet, usually inaccurate.